I want to tell you about two things that happened in the same week, because when you place them next to each other and actually think about what each one represents, the contrast is so stark and so complete that I genuinely think it requires no analysis at all. The story does all the work. All I have to do is describe what actually happened in accurate detail and let you sit with the description, because I suspect you are going to arrive at exactly the same conclusion I did, and probably before I've even finished the sentence.
He is a younger version of his Uncle Andrew,
Oblivious.
a pompous, entitled fool who doesn't know how to treat other people.
While Harry and Meghan's press operation was in full damage control mode, briefing journalists from what was apparently a comfortable European resort about security concerns and house requirements, and the emotional toll of a trip that half of Britain was not particularly asking for anyway, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was doing something completely different. She was on a mountain. Actually, she was on 3 mountains: Ben Nevis in Scotland, Scafell Pike in England, and Snowdon in Wales. The National 3 Peaks Challenge, which is 23 miles across some of the most demanding terrain the British Isles has to offer, completed with no advanced press briefing, no coordinated PR rollout, no cameras staged at the summit for the moment of arrival, and no publicist on the other end of the phone making sure the whole thing landed correctly.
Lots of people have asked me why I'm doing this challenge, and partly it's personal. I'm so grateful to be here, to be strong enough to walk these hills. But more importantly, it's to give something back and acknowledge really all the incredible work going on up and down this country.
She finished all 3. She went home. And then, after it was done and there was nothing left to stage or manage or coordinate, she told the world it had happened and what it had been for. That is the entire contrast right there. Fully formed before a single word of analysis is required of anyone, before I make a single comparison or observation. It sits there complete on its own, and if you spend a few seconds just sitting with what it describes, a woman months out of cancer treatment carrying her own backpack up 3 mountains for charity, while another woman from a luxury resort in Portugal is negotiating government security protocols.
Shocking differences between Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and Meghan Markle have just been exposed in glorious detail.
The rest of this video almost writes itself, but let's go deeper, because there is a lot more here than just the optics. Let me start with what Catherine actually did physically, because I don't think people who haven't been through cancer treatment or recovered from it fully appreciate what the 3 Peaks achievement actually represents for someone in her position. Cancer treatment. And I want to be clear here that this is not dramatization or emotional language deployed to make the story more compelling. This is documented medical reality about what the human body goes through. Is a sustained assault at a cellular level that changes the body in ways that are not immediately visible from the outside once treatment has ended. The fatigue alone, the specific bone-deep fatigue that comes with chemotherapy and its aftermath, can persist for months or even years after the treatment has ended. Your muscles deconditioning while you're in treatment, your cardiovascular fitness dropping, your immune system still rebuilding, your body essentially trying to figure out who it is again on the other side of something very serious. The cognitive effects, what some people call chemo brain, the psychological weight of what you've been through, all of it is real, and it doesn't simply evaporate because the scan results come back clean. So, when I say Catherine completed the 3 Peaks challenge in the months following treatment, not years later, not after an extended rehabilitation period, but in the first stages of rebuilding a life that the diagnosis had interrupted, I need you to understand what that actually means in physical terms, because it is genuinely extraordinary, and it does not get described that way often enough.
Incredible to see what Catherine has done here and how she is able to, yes, she lives a very public life, but there's also an aspect of her life that is still quite private that she's able to keep, that she has the confidence of friends and families that she can share with them things that
She trained for this, which means there are months of preparation sitting behind the achievement itself that nobody photographed and nobody talked about. Months of rebuilding a body that had been through something genuinely difficult and now needed to be rebuilt day by day. Months of getting up early and doing the work while simultaneously managing the public schedule and the family and the institutional demands and all the rest of what her position involves on a daily basis. The summit is only the visible part, and the summit is extraordinary. but the months of preparation before the summit. The months that nobody saw or documented or talked about. That is actually the story. And then there's the why. Stay with me here, because this is the part that separates a PR stunt from something real. And Catherine made the reason explicit in her own words after the climb. She wanted to give something back. She wanted to raise awareness for people living with and beyond cancer. Not people who have been cured and moved on, but people who are still living inside that diagnosis and everything that comes with it.
Catherine, the Princess of Wales, completing one of the most amazing feats for a royal who is recovering from cancer in total privacy, because she didn't shout about this Three Peaks mission at all until she had actually achieved it, which is just Catherine all over, isn't it? And so what did Meghan do? Rather than just thinking, I'm going to let the Princess of Wales have this moment, she decided to launch a new product, send out a summer entertainment email, and show off some of her work on MasterChef Australia.
She wanted to support the Royal Marsden, the hospital that treated her, and Cancer Research UK. And she wanted to stand on those summits and say something true and direct to every person who is currently fighting the same fight in the places where cameras don't go. And the line she chose to say it with was this: "Please know you are not alone." 4 words. No strategy session. No coordinated release timed around a competitor's news cycle. No publicist on the other end reading out the line for approval. Just 4 words to every person sitting alone somewhere with a cancer diagnosis, wondering if the person at the front of the room actually knows what that feels like. And because the person saying them had spent the last year living inside that specific experience, the words were not borrowed from a marketing brief. They came from somewhere real, and everybody who heard them could feel the difference. Now here's the detail that nobody needed to tell me, but that told me everything I needed to know about Catherine. And it is the kind of detail that you cannot manufacture through brand strategy, no matter how good your communications team is. On that trail, completing that challenge, doing something physically extraordinary that was also genuinely meaningful, she was unrecognized by most of the other hikers. Just another person in walking boots on a mountain path. And in that context, knowing that nobody was watching, she stepped aside for people coming down the path. She carried her own pack, and she stopped to comfort other climbers who were struggling. Not because it was being filmed, not because someone had identified trail empathy as a potential brand touchpoint, because she is someone who sees a person having a hard time on a hill and does what most decent people do, which is stop and say something kind, and then keep going. The future Queen of England stepping aside for strangers on a mountain path, unrecognized. That is who she is when nobody is looking, which is the only version of who you are that actually counts. There is a way to do this public life thing where you carry it on your shoulders the whole time, where every room and every path and every trail reminds you of what you are and what you represent, and you never quite get to just be a person in a place. And there is a way to do it where you put the weight down occasionally and just walk. What Catherine demonstrated on that trail, whether she knew it or not, was that after 15 years, she has figured out how to carry it all and still step aside for strangers.
But I think the thing that touched me most, and I have to be honest, there was a tear to the eye, was the beautiful footage that emerged of Catherine on the trek from members of the public.
Which is actually the hardest version of this, and the only one that matters. If Palace Insider is giving you the breakdown that the mainstream coverage is missing, the like button is how you support this channel, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Now, I want to talk about what was happening on the other side of this news cycle at exactly the same time, because the full picture requires both frames in view simultaneously, and ignoring what was happening in parallel would be leaving out the part of the story that makes this week so genuinely remarkable as a piece of royal storytelling. And I use the word storytelling deliberately, because one side of this story was being told and the other side was simply happening.
The way that Catherine was able to prove that she is able to give something back in a way that is just so genuine.
Harry and Meghan were reportedly in Portugal, which, to be very clear, is a completely normal place to take a holiday, and I have no objection to anyone being in Portugal. A lovely European resort, by all accounts, which makes complete sense as a holiday location if a holiday is what you are looking for. but which creates an interesting set of questions when you are simultaneously briefing journalists about the impossibility of visiting the United Kingdom without a full government security apparatus accompanying you at all times. The security dispute itself was generating a significant amount of coverage, not all of it sympathetic. Tearful phone calls that somehow reached journalists within hours of apparently happening, which tells you something important and specific about the nature of those particular tears and where they were being directed. Detailed briefings from sources described as being close to Harry about the exact security requirements that would need to be met before he would consider the visit happening. Threats to cancel a visit that, if you read the British public's reaction to the reporting, was being treated with levels of skepticism that the Sussex communications team clearly was not expecting. The press operation was running at what appeared to be close to full capacity, producing content, generating headlines, working the phones, briefing sympathetic outlets about the emotional dimensions of the situation, trying to keep the security story positioned as a story about a father wanting to protect his children rather than a story about a man making extensive demands from a Portuguese hotel. And all of that activity, all of that machinery, all of those briefings and phone calls and coordinated narrative management produced a week's worth of coverage that essentially asked the British public to feel sympathy for a man managing a dispute about UK government resources from what most people would consider a fairly comfortable European location. And then Catherine walked up Ben Nevis, and then Scafell Pike, and then Snowdon, carrying her own backpack, moving through the same weather and the same difficult terrain as every other person on those paths that week, unrecognized by most of the hikers around her, stopping for strangers who were struggling because that is what she does, completing 23 miles of some of the most demanding terrain in the British Isles, without a press advance team or a coordinated communication strategy or a publicist reading the coverage in real time from an office somewhere. And at the end of it, telling people who were fighting cancer that they were not alone because she now knew from experience that they weren't. In the same week, in the same news cycle, in the same royal conversation that everyone was having simultaneously. The fact that the Sussex operation chose that specific week, that specific moment, to launch an as-ever product line and a MasterChef Australia promotion into the royal conversation is something I've been thinking about since it happened, because it is genuinely extraordinary in a way that I find hard to look away from. Either it was a strategic miscalculation of significant proportions, meaning a team that has built its entire identity around being media savvy, around reading the news environment correctly, around knowing exactly which moments to move and which moments to hold, somehow failed to see that a cancer survivor climbing 3 mountains for charity was going to dominate every royal media outlet for days, and that launching lifestyle products into that environment was going to land exactly the way it landed. Or it was a deliberate attempt to generate competing coverage and pull some of the attention away from what Catherine was doing. And here's the thing about both of those possibilities. I am genuinely unsure which one is worse for the Sussex brand as a long-term proposition, because a miscalculation tells you the machine has lost its ability to read the environment it was built to operate in, and a deliberate decision to compete in that specific news cycle with that specific product reveals something even more fundamental about a team's understanding of what the public is actually responding to and why. Here is the wider point that I think this week illustrates more clearly than it has been illustrated in a while. The royal family is not a single institution moving in a single direction. It is multiple people making individual choices about how to use the public attention they have been given. And some of those choices compound into something lasting, while others dissipate almost immediately. Catherine has been making one kind of choice consistently in public and in private for a very long time. The cumulative effect of those choices is now visible in a way that makes any week like this one almost impossible to compete with, regardless of what else is happening in the news cycle. That is the real story underneath the mountain story. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next, and drop your take in the comments below because I genuinely want to know where you land on this one. There is a deeper point sitting underneath all of this though, and it is the point that I think deserves more attention than the surface comparison, because the surface comparison is obvious enough that it makes itself, and you do not need me to explain why Catherine climbing mountains looks better than Meghan launching jam from a resort. Everybody who saw the two stories in the same week already reached the obvious conclusion. What I want to dig into is why the gap between these two women has become so wide so quickly, and what it tells you about the specific nature of what people are responding to and what they are turning away from. Authenticity is not a brand position, and I think this is the most important sentence in this entire video, so I am going to say it again and then explain what I mean by it. Authenticity is not a brand position. It cannot be manufactured through carefully selected emotional disclosures in a Netflix documentary, however well produced that documentary is. It cannot be constructed through a podcast where you share vulnerable moments designed to connect with a specific demographic. It cannot be engineered through a product line named after a place in California, or a summer entertainment email with warm copy and beautiful photography, or a cooking show cameo timed to generate lifestyle brand visibility. All of these things can create the impression of authenticity for people who are not paying close attention, but they do not produce the real thing. And creating an impression and producing the real thing are not the same thing, and most people can feel the difference even when they cannot articulate why. What authenticity actually is, in the most practical and observable sense, is the version of yourself that exists when nobody is watching. It is who you are on a mountain path at 5 in the morning when your legs are tired and the summit is still further away than you want it to be. And the only reason to keep going is the reason you came for, which has to be real, because when you are in that place, there is nothing artificial left to sustain you. It is who you are when you notice a stranger struggling next to you, and you pause your own effort to offer something to them, even though pausing costs you something you were already working hard to earn. It is who you are when you have the platform and the profile and the institutional support to make something enormous and public and celebrated out of what you are doing, and you look at all of that available machinery and choose to go without it, because the thing you are doing has a meaning that staging it for the cameras would make smaller rather than larger. Catherine has been finding out who her authentic self is across the last 18 months, and the finding out happened almost entirely in private, without press announcements, without coordinated rollout, without a team on the other side of a phone call reading out approved language about her recovery journey and what it all means. She was just a woman who had been treated for cancer, rebuilding herself in the ways that you rebuild yourself from something like that. Slowly, with discipline, with days that probably felt like nothing, and weeks that probably felt like too much, and occasional moments of discovering that the body you thought was depleted is actually capable of more than you gave it credit for. And then she walked up 3 mountains and told people that they were not alone, not because a communication strategy called for it, but because she had spent a year being someone who was not alone even when it felt that way. And she wanted other people who were currently in that place to know the same thing. That is not a brand story. You cannot write a brand story that produces that specific effect, because a brand story is constructed to land in a predetermined way with a predetermined audience, and it carries the fingerprints of the construction in the way it arrives. You can feel when something has been shaped for you even when you are not consciously aware of feeling it. What Catherine did simply landed the way it landed because it was real, and real things do not carry those fingerprints, and the absence of them is something people feel immediately, even if they cannot quite articulate why this particular story hit differently than the last one. Now connect that to a photograph that was released in the same week, because I want to draw out one more comparison that gets less attention than the mountain story, but says something equally important about the specific choices these two households are making. Catherine and George, a quiet image released for Armed Forces Day. A young future king being introduced to the world of military service and national gratitude in a way that felt unhurried and genuine. Not announced in advance as a major media moment, not designed to generate a specific coverage response, just a thoughtful act of gentle introduction, doing in a public photograph what good parents do in private, connecting a child to something that matters in a way that respects both the child and the significance of what he is being connected to. George looked like himself in that photograph, which sounds like a small observation but is not a small thing, because children who are being managed for public consumption tend not to look like themselves, and there is a reason for that. Now put that image next to the briefings that were emerging in the same week about the possibility of Archie and Lilibet coming to the UK as part of the security dispute story, where the children's potential presence was functioning as emotional leverage in a negotiation. The sympathetic note in a story that, without the grandchildren dimension, was generating considerable public skepticism. The detail that keeps the story positioned as a grandfather being kept from his grandchildren's story rather than a man making demands from a Portuguese resort story. A cancer diagnosis and a long separation and 2 small children who deserve to know their family. All of it real, all of it genuinely sad, and all of it being deployed in the service of a security dispute press cycle in a way that turned two small children into supporting characters in their father's ongoing negotiation with a government department. One parent is introducing their child to public life through a quiet image that carries genuine meaning and that is not leverage for anything. The other is briefing journalists about the emotional cost of his children not seeing their grandfather in the context of arguing about police protection budgets. Both situations involve children who did not ask to be involved in any of this. And the difference in how they are being involved is one of the most telling details of this entire week. The last thing I want to say is this, because I think it is the thing that the Three Peaks story made clearest to me, even though I had understood it at some level for a while. The reason the contrast between these two women has become so stark and so visible is not simply because Catherine has been making clever strategic decisions and Meghan has been making clumsy ones, though there is an element of that. It is because one of them has been, consistently and across years, choosing the substance over the performance, choosing to let the real thing be the real thing without the communications layer that turns real things into content. And the cumulative weight of those choices has created something that no brand strategy can replicate or compete with. You cannot buy it. You cannot launch it as a product. You cannot brief it to journalists from a European resort. You build it by going and doing the thing, and not looking at the cameras while you are doing it, and doing it again and again, one quiet choice at a time across 15 years of public life, until what you have built is a version of yourself that stands completely on its own regardless of what anything else in the frame is doing. That is what came down from Ben Nevis, Scafell Pike, and Snowdon this week. Not as a strategy and not as a response to anything, just as a natural consequence of someone going and doing something real and telling the truth about it afterward. And it is going to be remembered by people who needed to hear it long after every product launch and every security briefing and every tearful phone call that somehow found its way to a journalist within hours of happening has been completely and totally forgotten. What is your take? Does the Three Peaks story change how you see this? Or has the gap between these two been visible for a long time, and this week just made it impossible for anyone to pretend otherwise? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe so you never miss what we cover next, and I will see you in the next one.